The phone vibrated against the mahogany desk at exactly 9:47 p.m., interrupting Alessandro Romano's review of shipping manifests that legally shouldn't have existed. He glanced at the screen, expecting one of his lieutenants reporting from the docks. Instead, an unfamiliar number glowed in the darkness of his private office. Alessandro didn't answer unknown calls. That was protocol. Survival instinct honed over 15 years of building an empire that straddled the knife's edge between legitimate business and the familia traditions his grandfather had brought from Palermo. He let it ring once, twice. Then he heard it. Through the phone's speaker, before he'd even accepted the call, a child's voice broke through. Small, terrified, speaking rapid Italian between sobs. Per favore, per favore. Help Mama. They're hurting her. They're yelling and Mama won't answer me. Alessandro's hand shot to the phone, swiping to accept before his conscious mind had processed the decision. Chi è questo? Who is this? Sofia. The little girl hiccuped, and Alessandro heard something crash in the background, followed by a man's rough voice shouting in Italian. Mama saved your number. It says emergenza. Your emergenza. They're hurting Mama. The name hit him like a physical blow. Sofia. 5 years old if his memory served correctly, which it always did when it came to matters of family and obligation. And if Sofia was calling, that meant her mother was... Sofia Conti? His voice remained calm, controlled, even as his free hand was already pulling up the security feed from his network, fingers flying across the keyboard. Dove say, where are you? Home, the apartment. The men came and Mama told me to hide in the closet, but I can hear. Her voice broke into fresh sobs. They're breaking things, Mama screamed. Alessandro was on his feet, grabbing his jacket from the chair, his mind cataloging and discarding possibilities at lightning speed. The Conti family. Giuseppe's daughter. The promise he'd made at Giuseppe's funeral 3 years ago. Standing in the rain while a then 2-year-old Sofia clutched her mother's hand. Both of them dressed in black. I protect what's mine, Alessandro had said to Lucia that day, his hand on Giuseppe's casket. Your father was family. That makes you family. You ever need anything. She'd thanked him politely, distantly, and disappeared into her quiet life in Queens. He'd kept tabs, discreetly. Single mother, working 2 jobs, raising her daughter in the modest apartment Giuseppe had left her. Clean, careful, staying far from the life her father had once touched at the edges as a legitimate business associate of the Romano family. Until tonight. Sofia, ascolta me. Listen to me very carefully. Alessandro strode through his office door, Angelo already rising from his post outside, reading his boss's body language with the precision of a decade's service. I need you to stay very quiet in that closet. Can you do that for me? Yes. Her breathing was ragged, panicked. Good girl. I'm coming right now. I'm getting in my car, and I'm coming to help your mama. He snapped his fingers at Angelo, mouthing, Conti, Queens, and watching his head of security immediately pull out his phone, already coordinating. But I need you to stay hidden and stay quiet. Can you tell me what the men look like? I don't know. I only heard them. They speak Italian, but not like Nonno Giuseppe. Different. Sicilian, Alessandro's mind supplied. Not his people then. Which meant someone else had decided Lucia Conti was fair game, that the protection of the Romano name meant nothing. That was a mistake he would personally correct. How many voices do you hear, Tesoro? He kept his tone gentle, soothing, even as he climbed into the back of his armored SUV, Angelo sliding into the driver's seat and pulling away from the curb before Alessandro had even closed the door. 2, maybe 3. They keep saying... Sofia's voice dropped to a whisper. They keep saying Nonno's name. They say Mama has to pay for something. But Nonno is dead. Mama cries about it. Giuseppe. The old man had been careful, had mostly kept his business separate from his family, but apparently not careful enough. Someone thought his daughter inherited more than just an apartment and a 5-year-old. Alessandro's jaw tightened. Sophia, is there a window in your closet? Can you see outside? No, it's just dark. I have Mama's phone. She dropped it. Smart girl. Resourceful. That was Lucia's doing. He remembered her at 15, the daughter of his father's associate, sharp-eyed even then, helping her father with his books, never missing a detail. You're doing so well, Sophia. Your mama would be very proud. Alessandro glanced at his watch. Traffic was light. 12 minutes if Angelo pushed it. I need you to do one more thing for me. Can you lock the closet door from inside? There's no lock, just the handle. Then put something against it. Shoes, boxes, anything heavy. He heard rustling, small grunts of effort, the sound of objects being moved by tiny hands. In the front seat, Angelo was on his phone, speaking in rapid Sicilian to someone Alessandro knew would be mobilizing the nearest crew. No one would arrive before Alessandro did, that was by design, but they'd be close enough to secure the perimeter, to ensure no one left that apartment building who wasn't supposed to. Okay, Sophia whispered. I put Mama's boot bag against the door. And the shoe boxes. Perfetto. Now I need you to be very, very quiet. Don't make any sound. I'm 8 minutes away. Promise you'll help Mama? The question, asked in a child's voice but carrying the weight of generations of Italian tradition, of family bonds that transcended blood, settled over Alessandro like a mantle. This wasn't just about Giuseppe's debt, whatever it was. This was about the fundamental code that had governed his life since his own father had explained it to him at 8 years old. Family protects family, his father had said. Always. No exceptions. I promise, Alessandro said. And he meant it with the same certainty he brought to every vow, every deal, every blood oath. I'm coming for your mama, and no one is going to hurt her anymore. The SUV took a corner at a speed that would have terrified most civilians. Alessandro barely noticed. His mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating scenarios. If these were Sicilian enforcers collecting on Giuseppe's debt, they wouldn't kill Lucia. Not yet. They'd want information first, leverage, something they could use. That gave him time. But the sounds Sophia was describing, the crashing, the shouting, Lucia's scream, those weren't the sounds of a gentle interrogation. Someone was making a point. Someone wanted Lucia afraid. Talk to me, Tesoro, Alessandro said quietly. Are you okay? I'm scared. The admission was tiny, heartbreaking. Mama always says I'm her brave girl, but I don't feel brave. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you're scared. Alessandro remembered his grandfather saying something similar, decades ago, before sending him on his first collection. And you did the right thing. You called for help. That was very brave. Will you stay on the phone? The whole time. I'm not going anywhere. In the front seat, Angelo was getting updates through his earpiece, his expression grim. He caught Alessandro's eye in the rearview mirror and shook his head once. Not good. Alessandro's free hand curled into a fist. Whoever had decided to target Lucia Conti had just made the last mistake of their lives. Sophia, can you still hear the men? They stopped yelling. It's quiet now. I don't like the quiet. Neither did Alessandro. Quiet meant they'd either found what they wanted, or they'd moved to a different kind of persuasion. He glanced at his watch again. 5 minutes. Do you remember me, Sophia? He kept his voice conversational, calm, trying to keep her distracted from whatever was happening on the other side of that closet door. We met at your grandfather's funeral. You gave me a flower, a white rose. He had. He'd knelt in the rain, and handed it to her while Lucia watched, her face pale and exhausted, accepting condolences with the grace of someone who'd been preparing for her father's death for months. Giuseppe had been sick, the cancer eating him from the inside while he tried to settle his affairs, to ensure his daughter and granddaughter would be provided for. Apparently, he'd missed something. "That's right," Alessandro said. "Your nonno was a good man. I knew him for a long time. Mama says he was the best papa in the world. She says..." Sophia's breath hitched. "She says when someone dies, they become a star. So nonno can watch me. Your mama is very smart." Alessandro swallowed against unexpected emotion. He'd seen death countless times, had ordered it more than he cared to count. But the innocence in Sophia's voice, the childish faith that her grandfather was somehow still watching, it reminded him why the code existed in the first place. Why family mattered. Why some things were worth protecting. Even when the world called you a monster for the protection you offered. The SUV screeched to a halt outside a modest 3-story building in a quiet Queens neighborhood. Angelo was out first, already scanning for threats, his hand inside his jacket. Alessandro followed, still holding the phone to his ear. "Sophia, I'm here. I'm at your building. Which apartment?" 2B, 2nd floor. "Stay in that closet. Don't come out until I tell you. Capisce?" "Capisce." Alessandro took the stairs 3 at a time, Angelo a half step behind. The door to 2B was slightly ajar, the frame splintered where someone had kicked it in. Inside, he could hear movement, low voices speaking in rough Sicilian dialect. He gestured for Angelo to circle around to the fire escape while he approached the door directly. The old way, his grandfather's way. Fast, brutal, decisive. Alessandro pushed the door open. The apartment was small but well kept, the kind of home a young mother would make for her daughter. Photos on the walls, Sophia's school pictures, candid shots of mother and daughter at parks and beaches, an old family photo showing Giuseppe with a much younger Lucia, toys organized in bins, a kitchen table with Sophia's coloring book still spread across it. And in the middle of the living room, 2 men Alessandro didn't recognize holding Lucia Conti by the arms, while a third stood in front of her, his fist raised. Lucia's lip was split, blood trickling down her chin. Her shirt was torn at the collar, but her eyes, dark and defiant, showed no fear, only fury. The 3 men turned as Alessandro entered, and he watched recognition dawn on their faces. Not recognition of him specifically, but of what he represented. The tailored suit, the cold confidence, the fact that he'd walked into their operation without hesitation. "Signor Romano," the one in front said, lowering his fist, "this doesn't concern you. You're in the home of Giuseppe Conti's daughter," Alessandro said quietly. "Giuseppe was under my family's protection. That makes this very much my concern. Giuseppe owed..." "I don't care what Giuseppe owed." Alessandro's voice could have frozen blood. "You laid hands on a woman under my protection. You terrorized a 5-year-old child. Those actions require correction." The man opened his mouth to argue. Alessandro pulled his gun, a simple, elegant motion, and shot him in the kneecap. The scream was satisfying. The other 2 men released Lucia immediately, reaching for their own weapons. But Angelo had come through the fire escape window behind them, his gun already trained on their backs. "Drop them," Angelo said calmly. They did. Alessandro walked forward, stepping over the writhing man on the floor, his attention fixed on Lucia. Up close, he could see the damage, bruises forming on her cheekbone, defensive marks on her forearms where she'd tried to protect herself. The way she held her ribs suggested they'd gotten body shots in too. But she stood straight, her chin up, meeting his eyes with the same fierce pride he remembered from her father. "Sophia?" she asked, her voice rough. "Safe, in the closet. I have her on the phone." Alessandro held up his cell. "Sophia, your mama is okay. I need you to stay quiet for just a little longer, yes? Okay. The small voice wavered with relief. Alessandro looked at the two men Angelo had pinned. Who sent you? We can't. He shot the second man in the foot. The sound was deafening in the small apartment. I'll ask once more, and then I start taking fingers. Who sent you? The first man, the one bleeding on the floor, broke first. Dante Gallo. He said Giuseppe owed him for a shipment that went missing 5 years ago. Said the daughter inherited the debt. Dante Gallo, small-time operator, Sicilian connections, delusions of grandeur. Alessandro knew him, had specifically warned him years ago about operating in Romano territory without permission. Apparently, the lesson hadn't taken. The debt, Alessandro said softly, is paid. Giuseppe Conti was under my protection. His family remains under my protection. You tell Dante Gallo that if he wants to collect anything, he can take it up with me personally. And you tell him. He leaned down, speaking directly into the wounded man's ear, that if he ever comes near this family again, I'll personally feed him to the fish. He straightened, looking at Angelo. Get them out. Make sure they understand the message. Angelo nodded, already herding the 3 men toward the door. They limped and stumbled, leaving blood on the carpet, but Alessandro didn't spare them another glance. His attention was entirely on Lucia. Can you walk? He asked. She nodded, then swayed slightly. Alessandro caught her elbow, steadying her, and felt her flinch before forcing herself still. I need to get Sophia, she said. I'll get her. You need to sit down before you fall down. For a moment, he thought she'd argue. Then her knees buckled, and Alessandro guided her to the couch, supporting her weight with surprising gentleness. Sophia, he called toward the bedroom. It's safe now. You can come out, Tesoro. He heard the sounds of boxes being moved, tiny hands working at obstacles too heavy for her. A moment later, a small figure appeared in the doorway. Dark curls like her mother's. Enormous brown eyes wide with fear and hope. Mama! Sophia ran across the room, launching herself at Lucia, who caught her daughter with a pained gasp that she quickly converted into a murmured reassurance. I'm okay, baby. I'm okay. Alessandro watched them cling to each other. This mother and child who'd just survived something no one should have to survive, and felt the weight of his promise settle more firmly around his shoulders. We need to leave, he said quietly. They know this address. It's not safe. Lucia looked up at him over Sophia's head, and in her eyes, he saw the moment she understood. This wasn't a rescue. This was an irrevocable change. The moment she'd programmed his number into her phone as emergency, the moment Giuseppe had accepted Romano protection years ago, this moment had become inevitable. She'd stepped into his world. And in Alessandro Romano's world, protection came with strings. Where? She asked. Somewhere safe. I have a property in Manhattan. Secure. Private. You and Sophia will stay there until this is resolved. I have a job. Sophia has school. Will be arranged. Alessandro pulled out his phone, already typing instructions to his people. Pack a bag. Just essentials. Everything else can be replaced. Lucia's jaw tightened, but she nodded, recognizing that this wasn't a negotiation. Not yet. Not when her daughter was still trembling against her chest, when blood still dripped from her split lip, when the apartment door hung broken on its hinges. She'd ask questions later, demand explanations, push back against the control he was exerting. But right now, she'd accept the protection he offered. Because that was how survival worked in Alessandro Romano's world. And whether she knew it or not, Lucia Conti had just become a permanent part of that world. The Manhattan penthouse was everything Lucia's Queen's apartment wasn't. Sprawling, pristine, decorated with the kind of casual wealth that came from generations of money, both legitimate and otherwise. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, the city lights spreading like fallen stars across the darkness. Sophia had fallen asleep in the car, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. And now she lay curled on a leather sofa that probably cost more than Lucia's entire year's rent. Lucia stood at those windows, her reflection ghostly in the glass, cataloging the damage she could see. Bruised cheekbone turning purple, split lip swollen, defensive marks on her arms darkening to ugly yellows and greens. Her ribs ached with every breath, sharp reminders of fists and boots, and the moment she'd thought she might not survive to see her daughter again. Behind her, she heard Alessandro on the phone, his voice low and controlled, speaking in rapid Italian to someone who was clearly accustomed to receiving orders at midnight. Arranging things, he'd said, making calls, ensuring their safety, ensuring their captivity. Some part of her mind whispered, "Dr. Esposito will be here in 20 minutes." Alessandro's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to find him watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "He's discreet. He'll check you over, make sure nothing's broken." "I'm fine." The words came automatically. The same lie she'd told herself while hiding Sophia in the closet, while taking blows meant to break her, while calculating how long she could hold out before they moved from fists to something worse. Alessandro's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested he'd heard that particular lie before. "Humor me." It wasn't a request. Lucia recognized the tone, the same one her father had used when discussing business, when the veneer of politeness couldn't quite hide the steel underneath. She'd grown up on the edges of this world, careful never to step too far in, knowing that men like Alessandro Romano didn't make suggestions. They made statements and expected compliance. "How did they find me?" she asked instead. "I've been careful. My father kept me separate from—" She gestured vaguely, encompassing the penthouse, the life, the empire Alessandro represented. All of this. "Your father did keep you separate." Alessandro moved to the bar, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey with practiced efficiency. He offered her one, which she accepted despite herself. But Giuseppe had business dealings that predated his association with my family. Dante Gallo apparently held a grudge about a shipment that went missing 5 years ago. 5 years ago, my father was already sick. Lucia took a sip of the whiskey, felt it burn down her throat, momentarily drowning the taste of blood. He wouldn't have been involved in anything. The shipment was stolen by someone else. But Gallo blamed Giuseppe, and when your father died without paying the perceived debt, Gallo decided you inherited the obligation. Alessandro's voice was clinical, matter of fact. It's an old-world mentality. Blood debt passed through generations. That's insane. That's tradition. He studied her over the rim of his glass. In my world, family obligations don't end with death. They transfer. Your father was a good man, Lucia, but he operated in circles where debts are paid in blood if necessary. The casual way he said it, blood if necessary, sent a chill through her despite the expensive warmth of the penthouse. This was Alessandro Romano's world. This was the reality her father had brushed against, had tried to shield her from, had ultimately failed to protect her from. So what now? She kept her voice steady, refusing to show fear. "I'm under your protection, which means what exactly? I live here? Give up my job, my life, my independence? Become another kept woman in a gilded cage?" Alessandro's expression flickered. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "You think that's what this is? Isn't it?" Lucia met his gaze directly. "You swept in, eliminated the immediate threat, and brought me to your territory. You're making arrangements for my life without asking what I want. That sounds like control to me, no matter how you dress it up as protection." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Lucia could hear Sophia's soft breathing from the couch, the distant hum of city traffic 40 stories below, the clink of ice in Alessandro's glass as he set it down with deliberate care. "Your father saved my life once," he said finally. "Did he ever tell you about that?" The shift in topic threw her. "No. I was 19, stupid, arrogant, thought I was invincible because I carried the Romano name." Alessandro's voice carried an edge of old memory, old pain. "I walked into a situation without proper backup, without thinking it through. Giuseppe was there on legitimate business. He had no reason to get involved. But when the shooting started, he pulled me behind cover, took a bullet in the shoulder that was meant for me." Lucia's breath caught. She'd seen the scar on her father's shoulder, had asked about it as a child. He'd told her it was from a car accident, nothing to worry about. He never said, because he was a good man who understood that some debts transcend business. Alessandro moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. "I owed him my life. When he died, that debt transferred to his family, to you, to Sophia. This isn't about control, Lucia. This is about honor. Honor." She tested the word, found it bitter. "Is that what you call shooting a man in your living room? What you call making my daughter hide in a closet while strangers beat her mother? I call that justice." No apology in his voice, no regret. "Those men violated the fundamental code. They threatened family. In my world, that requires correction." "Your world," Lucia laughed, the sound sharp and pained. "I don't want to be part of your world, Alessandro. I want my quiet life, my apartment, my normal job. I want Sophia to grow up without..." "Without what? Without protection?" Alessandro's voice hardened. "You had your quiet life, Lucia. You saw how well that worked out. Dante Gallo found you anyway. The only reason you're alive, the only reason Sophia isn't orphaned, is because you programmed my number into your phone 3 years ago and never deleted it." The truth of it hit like a physical blow. She had kept his number, some survival instinct overriding her desire for distance. And when Sophia found that phone, when small fingers dialed emergenza in desperation, it had been Alessandro Romano who answered. Alessandro, who'd dropped everything and raced across the city. Alessandro, who'd walked into violence without hesitation. Alessandro, who'd kept his promise to a dead man because that's what honor demanded. The doorbell chimed, cultured and discreet. Alessandro moved to answer it, returning moments later with an older man carrying a leather medical bag. "Doctor." Claudio Esposito had the kind of face that suggested he'd seen everything and judged nothing, useful traits in a physician who treated the Romano family. "Signora Conti." The doctor's voice was professionally warm. "Let's have a look at you." Lucia submitted to the examination with practiced stoicism, learned from years of her father's illness, from emergency rooms and hospice care, and the particular strength required to stay functional while your world collapsed. The doctor worked efficiently, checking her ribs with gentle pressure that still made her gasp, examining the bruises, confirming what she already knew. "Nothing broken," Dr. Esposito said finally. "But you'll be sore for several days. Ice for the swelling, pain medication if needed. Watch for signs of concussion, dizziness, nausea, vision problems. If any of those develop, call me immediately." "I will." She accepted the prescription he handed her, knowing one of Alessandro's people would fill it within the hour. Everything arranged, everything controlled. After the doctor left, Alessandro gestured toward a hallway. "Guest rooms are this way. You and Sophia can take the suite at the end. It has connecting rooms. There's clothing in the closet, basic necessities in the bathroom. If you need anything else, there's staff available." Staff. The word tasted foreign. "You have live-in staff in Manhattan?" "Security, primarily. Angelo coordinates the overnight watch. But there's also Mrs. Bianchi. She manages the household, handles meals, anything you might need." He paused at a doorway, his hand on the frame. "This isn't a prison, Lucia. You're free to come and go. But I'd prefer you had security with you. at least until Dante Gallo understands the situation. Understands that I'm your property now? Understands that you're under my protection? There's a difference. Alessandro's jaw tightened, the first crack in his controlled facade. I'm not trying to own you. I'm trying to keep you alive. Lucia wanted to argue, wanted to push back against the fundamental wrongness of being extracted from her life and deposited in luxury she didn't ask for. But exhaustion weighed on her like physical pressure, the adrenaline finally draining away and leaving only pain and bone-deep weariness. I need to put Sophia to bed. She moved past him toward the couch where her daughter slept, but Alessandro was faster, scooping the small girl up with surprising gentleness. I'll carry her. You're in no condition. He was right, which only irritated her more. But she followed him down the hallway to a suite that was larger than her entire apartment, watching as he laid Sophia carefully on a bed that looked like something from a princess movie. Her daughter didn't wake, just curled instinctively around the pillow, her small face relaxed in sleep. She's brave, Alessandro said quietly. Calling me like that. Staying quiet when I told her to. That takes real courage. She's 5. Lucia's voice cracked despite her best efforts. She shouldn't need courage. She should be worried about dolls and cartoons, not hiding from men who want to hurt her mother. No, she shouldn't. Alessandro turned to face her in the dim light filtering from the hallway. But she does. Because Dante Gallo decided your father's perceived debts mattered more than a child's safety. Because this world, my world, doesn't care about what should be. It only cares about what is. Then maybe I don't want any part of your world. Too late. Not cruel, just honest. The moment those men broke down your door, you became part of it. The only question now is whether you accept my protection or try to face it alone. Lucia looked at her sleeping daughter, remembering the terror in Sophia's voice on that phone call, the way she'd trembled while hiding in the closet, the nightmares that would inevitably come. Then she looked at Alessandro, this man who embodied everything she'd tried to avoid, everything dangerous and complicated and morally gray, but who'd also answered when she needed him most. What does your protection cost? She asked. Nothing's free in your world, Alessandro. What's the price? His expression was unreadable in the shadows. Stay here where I can ensure your safety. Let me handle Dante Gallo. Beyond that, he paused. We'll figure out the rest as we go. It wasn't an answer. It was a deferment, a promise to discuss terms later when she wasn't bruised and exhausted and desperate. But it was also honest in its own way. An acknowledgement that this arrangement would require negotiation, boundaries, rules they'd have to establish together. 1 week, Lucia said. I'll stay for 1 week while you handle Gallo. Then we revisit this arrangement. 1 week, Alessandro agreed. But something in his voice suggested he knew it wouldn't be that simple. That 1 week would become 2, would become a month, would become however long it took for her to realize that stepping into his world wasn't temporary. It was permanent. He left her then, closing the door with a soft click that felt terribly final. Lucia stood in the luxurious silence, looking at her daughter, cataloging her options. She could run, take Sophia and disappear, change their names, start over somewhere Dante Gallo and Alessandro Romano and all the complications of her father's world couldn't find them. But that required resources she didn't have, and left them vulnerable to threats she couldn't predict. Or she could stay. Accept Alessandro's protection. Navigate the dangerous waters of owing debts to a man whose business operated in shadows and whose code of honor was written in blood. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Your belongings from the apartment will arrive tomorrow. Angelo secured the location and retrieved what could be salvaged. AR. Even now, in the middle of the night, Alessandro was arranging things, taking control, making decisions. Protecting her, some part of her mind whispered. Trapping her, another part argued. Lucia deleted the message and climbed into the second bed in Sophia's room, too wary to sleep in a separate space, needing to be close enough to hear her daughter breathe. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, impossibly soft. The mattress conformed perfectly to her bruised body. Everything designed for comfort, for luxury, for a life she'd never wanted. But as she finally surrendered to exhausted sleep, her last conscious thought wasn't about the cage. It was about the man who'd built it, and the terrible, dangerous realization that part of her was grateful he had. 3 days into her week at Alessandro's penthouse, Lucia discovered that protection came with an education. She'd woken to find Sophia already dressed and eating breakfast in the enormous kitchen, chatting happily with Mrs. Bianchi about the correct way to make carbonara. The older woman had taken to Lucia's daughter, with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never had grandchildren of her own, teaching her Italian phrases and sneaking her extra cookies when she thought Lucia wasn't looking. "Mama!" Sophia called, waving a fork. "Mrs. Bianchi is teaching me how to crack eggs with one hand." Lucia managed to smile despite the persistent ache in her ribs, despite the bruises that were yellowing but still visible, despite the surreal strangeness of her life having been completely upended 72 hours ago. "That's wonderful, baby. But remember, we're guests here. We can't—" "Nonsense." Mrs. Bianchi waved a wooden spoon dismissively. "Mr. Romano specifically said you're family. Family isn't guests. Family is family." The words settled over Lucia with uncomfortable weight. Family. That's how Alessandro had framed this arrangement from the beginning. Invoking her father's name, claiming debts and honor and traditions she'd spent her adult life trying to escape. After breakfast, after Sophia had been installed in the penthouse's media room with enough Disney movies to keep her occupied for hours, Lucia found Alessandro in his study. He looked up from a stack of documents as she entered, and she caught the brief flash of something, surprise, pleasure, before his expression settled into neutral professionalism. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Sore, restless, like a prisoner in a very expensive cage." She closed the door behind her, knowing this conversation required privacy. "We need to talk about Dante Gallo." "I'm handling Gallo." "Which means what, exactly?" Lucia moved to the window, putting distance between them, needing space to think clearly. "You shoot him like you shot those men in my apartment. Make him disappear. Add another body to whatever count you're already carrying." Alessandro's silence was answer enough. "I don't want anyone dead because of me," she said. "This isn't about you. It's about principle." He stood, moving around his desk with that predatory grace she was starting to recognize. "Dante Gallo threatened family. That violation requires correction, regardless of your preferences." "My preferences?" Lucia laughed, sharp and bitter. "Is that what we're calling my moral objections to murder? I call it naivety." No heat in his voice, just matter-of-fact assessment. "You want to believe there's a civilized solution to this, that Gallo will listen to reason, accept compensation, walk away peacefully. But men like him don't operate that way. They understand only two things: power and consequences." "Then make the consequences something other than death." "Such as?" The question hung between them, a challenge. Lucia realized she'd walked into this conversation without a plan, operating on moral certainty, but no practical solutions. In Alessandro's world, the world her father had brushed against, had tried to shield her from, what were the alternatives to violence? "I don't know," she admitted. "But there has to be something. Financial compensation, territory concessions, whatever currency your world trades in that isn't blood." Alessandro studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit. I want to show you something." She obeyed, curiosity overriding her instinct to maintain distance. Alessandro pulled a folder from his desk drawer, spreading photographs across the surface between them. "Dante Gallo," he said, tapping the first photo. A man in his 50s, heavy-set, cruel eyes. Small-time operator with Sicilian connections. Runs protection rackets in Queens and Brooklyn. Dabbles in smuggling. Recently tried to expand into drug distribution on my territory. He laid out more photos. Men beaten bloody. A burned-out storefront. A woman with a black eye and broken arm. These are people who crossed Gallo, or who couldn't pay his debts, or who were simply in his way. Lucia's stomach turned, but she forced herself to look, to see the reality of the man who'd sent thugs to her home, who'd terrorized her daughter, who'd nearly... This... Alessandro placed another photo, this one showing a young man, maybe 25, is Michael Russo. He worked at a restaurant Gallo claimed owed protection money. Michael tried to testify against him. 2 weeks later, he disappeared. His body was found in the East River 3 months after that. "Stop!" Lucia's voice was barely a whisper. "Why? Because it's uncomfortable?" Alessandro leaned back, his gaze never leaving her face. "This is the man you're asking me to show mercy to. This is who you think deserves a civilized solution. I think..." She forced herself to breathe. To think. To articulate something beyond instinctive revulsion. "I think you're showing me the worst of him to justify the worst of you. I'm showing you the truth." He gathered the photos, returning them to the folder with clinical efficiency. "In your world, the normal world you want to return to, people call the police. They trust the system. They believe justice comes from courts and laws. But Dante Gallo has judges on his payroll, cops who look the other way, lawyers who make evidence disappear. Your civilized solutions don't work against men like him. So your solution is to become just as bad? My solution is to protect what's mine." Alessandro's voice dropped, taking on that dangerous softness she was learning to recognize. "You and Sophia are under my protection now. That means Dante Gallo becomes my problem to solve. The only question is whether you trust me to solve it effectively." Trust. The word echoed through her mind. Complicated and impossible. How could she trust a man who dealt in violence and intimidation, who'd shot someone in front of her without hesitation, who operated in the shadows her father had tried to keep her from? But he'd also answered when she called, had kept Sophia calm during the worst night of their lives, had brought them to safety without asking for anything in return. "My father trusted you," Lucia said finally. "He put your number in my phone as emergency contact. He must have believed you'd help if I needed it. Giuseppe understood what I am." Alessandro's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He knew the kind of world I operate in, the choices I make. But he also knew that I keep my promises. Always. Even the difficult ones? Especially those. Lucia thought about her father, the man who'd raised her with love and laughter, who'd taught her to question authority and think independently, who'd also had connections to people like Alessandro Romano. Giuseppe Conti had been a man of contradictions, legitimate businessman and friend to criminals, devoted father and keeper of dangerous secrets. Had he known this would happen? Had he anticipated that someday his daughter would need the protection only someone like Alessandro could provide? "Tell me about the debt," she said. "The real one. Not Gallo's manufactured grudge, but what my father actually owed you." Alessandro was quiet for so long she thought he might refuse. Then he moved to the bar, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey despite the early hour, handing her one before settling into the chair beside her, rather than behind his desk. "Giuseppe saved my life when I was 19, he began, and Lucia recognized this as the story he'd started days ago, but never finished. I was arrogant, stupid, thought the Romano name made me invincible. I walked into a deal that was actually a setup, rival family trying to take out my father's heir. Giuseppe was there on legitimate business, importing olive oil and wine. He had no reason to get involved. Alessandro swirled his whiskey, staring into it like it held answers. But when the shooting started, he pulled me behind cover, took a bullet in the shoulder that was meant for my chest. Then he grabbed a gun from one of the dead shooters and held them off until my family's people arrived. A businessman who'd never fired a weapon in his life suddenly became a soldier because he saw a kid about to die. Lucia's throat tightened. That was her father, the man who'd volunteer to coach her soccer team despite knowing nothing about sports, who'd donate to every charity that asked because he couldn't stand the thought of anyone suffering. Of course, he'd save a stranger's life without thinking about the cost. My father took him to our family's doctor, made sure he received the best care, paid for everything. Alessandro met her eyes. Giuseppe refused any payment beyond medical costs, said he didn't save me for money. That made him either the most honest man I'd ever met or the most naive. He was both, Lucia said softly. Yes. Alessandro's smile was brief but genuine. He was, and that's why when he came to me 5 years later, needing help with a business problem, I couldn't refuse. What kind of problem? The kind where his legitimate import business had accidentally become a front for someone else's illegal smuggling operation. Alessandro's expression hardened. Giuseppe didn't know. He was good at business but terrible at reading people. Someone had been using his shipping manifests to move contraband, setting him up as the fall guy if anything went wrong. Lucia's stomach dropped. The shipment Dante Gallo thinks my father stole. Yes. Giuseppe's business partner was actually working for Gallo, using Giuseppe's roots and reputation to move stolen goods. When one of those shipments got intercepted by my people, because they were moving through Romano territory without permission, the partner blamed Giuseppe and disappeared, leaving your father holding responsibility for a theft he didn't commit. So my father came to you. He came to me, Alessandro confirmed. Asked me to clear his name, to fix the problem he'd accidentally created. I did. I found the real thief, made sure everyone understood Giuseppe had been used, settled the territorial dispute with the families whose goods had been stolen. Your father's reputation was protected, his business continued operating legitimately, and Dante Gallo was warned to stay away from him. But Gallo didn't forget. Gallo doesn't forget anything. He's small and petty and vindictive. When Giuseppe died, and there was no longer Romano protection actively enforcing the warning, Gallo decided to collect on a debt your father never owed. Alessandro set down his glass with controlled precision. That's why those men came to your apartment. That's why Sofia had to hide in a closet. Because Dante Gallo saw an opportunity to extract payment from a dead man's daughter. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. Her father's illness, his careful arrangements in his final months, the way he'd insisted she program Alessandro's number into her phone, just in case. Giuseppe had known this might happen, had tried to protect her the only way he could, by ensuring she had access to someone powerful enough to stand against men like Gallo. So what now? Lucia asked. You've explained the history, shown me that Gallo is dangerous, made it clear that civilized solutions won't work. What's your actual plan? Gallo needs to understand that you and Sofia are permanently off limits, that any future attempts to collect this fabricated debt will result in his complete destruction. Alessandro's voice was matter of fact, discussing violence like it was a business negotiation. I'll arrange a meeting, make the terms clear, give him the opportunity to walk away. And if he doesn't take that opportunity, then I remove the threat permanently. There it was, the line she couldn't cross, the fundamental difference between her world and his. Alessandro offered protection, but that protection came with blood, with violence, with solutions that her conscience couldn't accept, even as her survival instincts recognized their necessity. I need time to think about this, Lucia said. Take the time you need. But understand. Alessandro leaned forward, his intensity sharpening. Dante Gallo isn't waiting for you to make peace with my methods. Every day you hesitate is another day he might try something else. Another day Sofia is at risk. The mention of her daughter was calculated, deliberate. Alessandro knew exactly how to apply pressure, how to make Lucia's choices feel impossible. She could object to his methods while accepting his protection, could maintain her moral high ground while benefiting from his violence. Or she could acknowledge the uncomfortable truth that in this situation, with these stakes, Alessandro's way might be the only way that kept her daughter safe. 1 week, she said, standing. You said I could stay for 1 week while you handled this. It's been 3 days. You have 4 more to resolve it however you see fit. After that, we discuss what happens next. Agreed. Alessandro stood as well, offering his hand. 4 days. Lucia shook it, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers, the controlled strength in his grip. This was the man who'd shot someone in front of her without hesitation. The man who'd kept her father's secrets and honored debts that transcended death. The man who'd answered when a terrified 5-year-old called for help. She released his hand and walked out, feeling his gaze follow her down the hallway. 4 days to decide whether she could live with the protection he offered, whether she could accept safety that came soaked in moral compromise. 4 days to figure out if she was her father's daughter, in more ways than she'd ever wanted to admit. On the 5th day of her stay at Alessandro's penthouse, Lucia woke to find Sofia already dressed in new clothes that had appeared in the closet overnight. Expensive designer pieces that probably cost more than Lucia's monthly salary at both her jobs combined. Mrs. Bianchi said these were for me. Sofia twirled in a navy blue dress with white trim. She said I look like a principessa. Lucia's first instinct was to refuse, to pack her daughter back into their Target clearance clothes, to reject this casual display of wealth that made her stomach clench with discomfort. But Sofia was beaming, happier than she'd been since before the attack, and Lucia couldn't bring herself to dim that joy. You look beautiful, baby. She kissed Sofia's forehead. But remember, these are borrowed. We're still guests here. Mrs. Bianchi says we're family. That word again. Family. The justification Alessandro used for everything. The protection. The control. The decisions he made without consulting her. She was beginning to understand that in his world, family was both shield and shackle, protection and possession. After breakfast, Angelo appeared at the penthouse door, dressed in his usual dark suit, his expression professionally neutral. Mr. Romano asked if you'd join him this morning. He has something to show you. Lucia's guard went up immediately. Show me what? He said you'd want to see how he handles Dante Gallo. Everything in her wanted to refuse. She didn't want to witness whatever violent resolution Alessandro had planned, didn't want to become complicit through observation. But she'd given him 4 days. Those 4 days were up today. She'd asked for transparency, for involvement in decisions about her future. This was what involvement looked like. Sofia stays here with Mrs. Bianchi, Lucia said firmly. Of course. Mr. Romano would never bring a child to... Angelo stopped himself. She'll be safe here. I guarantee it with my life. The solemn way he said it reminded Lucia that these men operated on codes she barely understood, where honor and loyalty meant something visceral and absolute. Angelo would die before he let harm come to Sofia. That certainty should have been terrifying. Instead, it was oddly reassuring. 20 minutes later, Lucia found herself in the back of Alessandro's armored SUV, heading downtown to a location Angelo wouldn't specify. Alessandro sat beside her, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her month's rent, checking his phone with the casual efficiency of a man comfortable with power. Where are we going? Lucia asked. Neutral territory, a restaurant in Little Italy that's been operating since Prohibition. Family who owns it has survived by staying neutral in all disputes. Alessandro pocketed his phone, giving her his full attention. Dante Gallo agreed to meet, discuss terms. You're negotiating? I'm clarifying reality. He studied her face. You asked for a solution that didn't involve immediate violence. This is what that looks like. One final opportunity for Gallo to understand that pursuing you carries consequences he can't survive. The SUV pulled up outside a restaurant that looked like something from a movie. Old brick facade, faded awning, small tables visible through windows covered in checkered curtains. Alessandro exited first, scanning the street with the practiced awareness of someone who'd survived by assuming every shadow held threats. Then he offered Lucia his hand. She took it, letting him guide her from the vehicle, aware of how this must look to anyone watching. Her in clothes borrowed from his penthouse wardrobe, wearing a cashmere coat that had appeared in the closet alongside Sophia's designer dresses. Him in his expensive suit, his hand at the small of her back, proprietary and protective in equal measure. They looked like exactly what Dante Gallo would believe them to be. A powerful man and his woman, wealth and privilege, and the kind of relationship that came with both. Inside, the restaurant was dim and old-fashioned, red leather booths and dark wood paneling, the smell of garlic and tomato sauce heavy in the air. An older man in a white shirt and black vest greeted Alessandro by name, leading them through the dining room to a private section in the back. Dante Gallo sat at a corner table, flanked by two men who were clearly muscle. He looked older than his photos, heavier, with the kind of mean eyes that came from decades of casual cruelty. When he saw Lucia, something predatory flashed across his face. Signor Romano. Gallo didn't stand. And this must be Giuseppe's daughter. She's prettier than I expected. Alessandro's hand tightened fractionally on Lucia's back, the only sign of reaction. Let's discuss business, Dante. That's why we're here. They slid into the booth opposite Gallo, Alessandro positioning himself between Lucia and the other man. Angelo remained standing near the entrance, his presence a reminder that Alessandro hadn't come unprotected either. Business? Gallo smiled, showing yellowed teeth. Of course, the debt Giuseppe owed me. Giuseppe owed you nothing. Alessandro's voice could have cut glass. We've already established this. The shipment you claim he stole was taken by your own man, who used Giuseppe's legitimate business as cover. Giuseppe was cleared of all involvement. This meeting is to clarify that any debt you believed existed died with him. The daughter inherits my protection. Alessandro leaned forward slightly, his whole body language shifting to something dangerous. Which means she inherits my patience, which is considerably less generous than her father's. Touch her or her daughter again, and I'll consider it a personal insult. Gallo's smile never wavered. You're spreading yourself thin, Romano. Protecting everyone, controlling everything. Some people in our world are starting to wonder if you have the strength to back up all those promises. Then some people should ask the families I've eliminated in the past 5 years. No threat in Alessandro's voice, just fact. Or they could ask the Bratva how their expansion into Brooklyn went. Or the Colombians who thought they could move product through my territory without permission. Ask any of them how thin I'm spread. The temperature in the private room seemed to drop. Lucia felt the violence simmering beneath Alessandro's controlled exterior, recognized that she was witnessing the man her father must have known. Not the protective figure who carried Sophia to bed, but the empire builder who'd consolidated power through force and fear. So this is about respect, Gallo said. You want me to publicly acknowledge that Giuseppe's debt is settled. I want you to understand that Lucia Conti and her daughter are permanently off limits, that any future attempts to collect, harass, or threaten them will result in your immediate and total destruction. Alessandro pulled a folder from his jacket, sliding it across the table. This is what that destruction looks like. Gallo opened the folder. Lucia couldn't see the contents, but she watched the color drain from his face. These are complete financial records of every operation you run, every account, every asset, every person on your payroll, including the 3 police officers, 2 judges, and 1 federal prosecutor, who supplement their income through your generosity. Alessandro's smile was colder than his voice had been. I also have documentation of the 12 people you've had killed in the past decade, with enough evidence to put you in prison for the rest of your life. Or, he paused, to make you irrelevant in our world. Dead or in prison, either way, you're finished. You can't. I already have. The only question is what I do with this information. Alessandro leaned back, his posture relaxing slightly. If you walk away from this manufactured debt, forget Giuseppe Conti ever existed. I keep this filed away. You continue your small operations, stay out of my territory, and we have no further conflict. And if I don't? Then I activate everything. Your police protection disappears. Your operations get raided. Your assets get frozen. Every family you owe money to suddenly gets anonymous tips about your weaknesses. Alessandro's voice dropped to that dangerous softness. And when you're completely vulnerable, when you have nothing left to defend yourself with, I'll let nature take its course. There are a lot of people who'd like to see you dead, Dante. I wouldn't even have to get my hands dirty. Lucia's breath caught. This was Alessandro's alternative to immediate violence, a different kind of destruction, slower, but just as final. He'd researched, compiled evidence, built a case that could dismantle Gallo's entire operation without firing a single shot. It was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. Gallo stared at the folder for a long moment. Then he looked at Lucia, his expression calculating. She must be something special for you to go to all this trouble. She's family, Alessandro said simply. That's all the reason I need. Family. Gallo closed the folder, sliding it back across the table. Giuseppe was soft. I see his daughter is too, hiding behind your protection instead of fighting her own battles. Lucia felt something snap inside her. She'd been silent through this entire exchange, playing the role of helpless woman being protected by a powerful man. But she was Giuseppe Conti's daughter, and he'd raised her to be more than decoration. My father wasn't soft, she said, her voice steady despite the fear thrumming through her veins. He was honorable. He paid his debts, all of them. He saved Mr. Romano's life and refused payment beyond medical costs. He built a legitimate business and raised his daughter to have principles. That's not softness. That's strength you're apparently too petty to recognize. Gallo's eyes narrowed. Careful, little girl. You're insulting a man who sent thugs to beat me in front of my 5-year-old daughter. Lucia leaned forward, matching Alessandro's earlier posture. Who manufactures debts from dead men and terrorizes women who can't fight back? You want to talk about soft? You're not even brave enough to face your targets yourself. You send others to do your violence while you hide behind manufactured grudges. Lucia. Alessandro's voice held warning, but also something else. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. No. She kept her gaze locked on Gallo. He needs to hear this. My father was worth 10 of you, Dante Gallo. He had honor, integrity, courage. You have nothing but fear and petty cruelty. So yes, I'm under Mr. Romano's protection. Because I'm smart enough to accept help when it's offered, and principled enough to know that manufactured debts from small men don't obligate me to anything. The silence that followed was absolute. Gallo's face had gone red, his hands clenched on the table. His muscle had tensed, ready to react. Angelo had moved slightly closer, his hand inside his jacket. Then, unexpectedly, Gallo laughed. Giuseppe's daughter indeed. He shook his head, something like genuine amusement crossing his features. He always did have fire. I see she inherited it. So, we have an understanding. Alessandro's voice had lost its dangerous edge, become almost conversational. The debt is settled. Lucia and Sophia are off limits. You walk away and continue your business elsewhere. Gallo studied them both for a long moment. Then he nodded. We have an understanding. But Romano... He stood, his men rising with him. Next time someone insults me to my face, make sure they're worth the protection you're offering. Because I'm letting this slide once, for Giuseppe's memory, not twice. He left, his muscle following, leaving Lucia and Alessandro alone in the private room. The moment the door closed, Lucia's hands started shaking, delayed adrenaline finally catching up to her conscious mind's recklessness. That was... Alessandro started. Stupid. I know. Lucia pressed her hands flat on the table to stop their trembling. I couldn't sit there and let him insult my father, let him call me soft for accepting help. I was going to say brave. Alessandro reached across the table, covering one of her shaking hands with his. Incredibly stupid, but also brave. Do you have any idea how close you came to? To what? To him having his men attack me in neutral territory? To starting a war between families? Lucia met his eyes. Or were you always going to stop it before it got that far? Alessandro's expression shifted, became almost sheepish. Angelo had 3 men positioned around the restaurant. If Gallo had moved aggressively, he wouldn't have made it to the door. So, I was never actually in danger. You were in enough danger that my heart stopped when you started insulting him. Alessandro's grip on her hand tightened slightly. But you were also right. About Giuseppe. About honor. About Gallo being a coward who hides behind others. Everything you said was true. Just spectacularly poor timing. Welcome to my world. His smile was brief but genuine, where truth and timing are rarely aligned. They sat there for a moment, hands still touching across the table, the weight of what had just happened settling over them both. Lucia had defended her father's memory, had shown Dante Gallo that Giuseppe Conti's daughter wasn't the helpless victim he'd assumed. But she'd also demonstrated exactly why Alessandro's protection was necessary. Because men like Gallo didn't respect courage or principles. They respected power, and Alessandro had just demonstrated that he had more of it than Gallo could overcome. What happens now? Lucia asked. Now we go home. I monitor Gallo to ensure he keeps his word. You and Sofia continue staying at the penthouse until I'm certain the threat is completely neutralized. Alessandro released her hand, but slowly, reluctantly. And we discuss what comes after. After. Your week was up yesterday. We need to talk about the longer-term arrangement. The longer-term arrangement. Permanent protection that came with permanent strings. A life lived under Alessandro Romano's watch. Safe, but no longer entirely her own. But as they left the restaurant and returned to the SUV, as Angelo drove them back to the penthouse where Sofia was probably learning to make fresh pasta with Mrs. Bianchi, Lucia realized something had shifted. She wasn't just accepting Alessandro's protection anymore. She was starting to understand why her father had trusted this dangerous man enough to put his number in her phone as emergency. And that understanding was almost more frightening than anything Dante Gallo could have threatened. 2 weeks after the meeting with Dante Gallo, Lucia stood in Alessandro's study, looking at documents that would change everything. A trust fund. She read the paperwork again, struggling to process the numbers. For Sofia's education. College, graduate school, whatever she chooses. Alessandro spoke from behind his desk, his voice matter of fact. The principal is protected, earnings distributed according to benchmarks tied to her academic progress and life milestones. This is... Lucia did the math in her head, her hands trembling slightly. This is more money than I'll make in my entire life. It's what your father would have wanted. Giuseppe valued education above almost everything else. My father wouldn't have wanted me accepting charity from... She stopped herself, but Alessandro finished the thought. From a criminal? From someone whose wealth comes from illegal operations? His expression didn't change. Giuseppe knew exactly what I was, Lucia. He accepted my help when he needed it. This is no different. This is completely different. This is you making my daughter dependent on you. This is me ensuring Sophia has opportunities regardless of what happens to either of us. Alessandro stood, moving around his desk to face her directly. If something happens to me tomorrow, the trust is irrevocable. If you decide to leave, to go back to your life, the money is still hers. There are no strings attached. There are always strings. But even as Lucia said it, she was reading the paperwork more carefully, seeing the truth in his words. The trust was structured to be completely independent, managed by a neutral third party, accessible to Sophia regardless of Lucia's relationship with Alessandro. It was the kind of gift that came with no expectation of return, which made it more dangerous than any debt. Why? Lucia asked. Why do all of this? The protection, the penthouse, now this. What do you want from me? Alessandro was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her face with that intensity she'd come to recognize. Your father saved my life. That created a debt that can never be fully repaid. But it's more than that. He moved to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Giuseppe was the only person outside my family who treated me like a human being instead of a weapon. He'd invite me to Sunday dinners, talk to me about books and art and ideas that had nothing to do with business. He showed me there could be more to life than power and violence. Lucia's throat tightened. She remembered those Sunday dinners, remembered her father inviting various business associates, remembered a younger Alessandro sitting at their table, listening to Giuseppe's passionate discussions about Italian literature and Renaissance art. She'd been 15, awkward and shy, barely noticing the quiet young man who seemed so out of place among her father's usual guests. I didn't know, she said softly. You weren't supposed to. Giuseppe kept his worlds very separate. Alessandro turned back to face her. But he gave me something I didn't know I needed. Proof that I could be more than what my family demanded. That there was honor in protection, not just in power. And now you're trying to repay that by protecting us. I'm trying to honor his memory by being the man he believed I could be. Alessandro's voice roughened slightly. Giuseppe died believing his daughter and granddaughter would be safe. I intend to make that belief justified. Lucia set down the trust documents, her hands steadier now. I've been here for 2 weeks. Sophia has settled in, made friends with Mrs. Bianchi, started calling this place home. I've watched you coordinate your business, seen how you operate, witnessed the respect and fear you command from everyone who works for you. And I'm terrified. The admission cost her, but she forced it out. Not of you specifically, but of what staying here means, of raising my daughter in this world, of becoming dependent on protection that comes from violence, of losing myself in the process. Alessandro listened without interrupting, giving her space to articulate fears she'd been holding since that first night. But I'm also practical, Lucia continued. Dante Gallo backed down because of your power, not my principles. Men like him will always exist. We'll always see people like me as vulnerable targets. I can go back to my queen's apartment, get my jobs back, pretend that none of this happened. But that doesn't make me safe. It just makes me willfully ignorant. So what do you want to do? The question, asked without pressure, without manipulation, surprised her. Alessandro was offering her a choice, even knowing her decision would affect his ability to keep his promise to Giuseppe. I want to negotiate, Lucia said. Real terms, clear boundaries. If Sophia and I stay here, if we accept your protection, I need to know exactly what that means. Alessandro's expression shifted. Surprise, then something like pride. All right, name your terms. Lucia had been thinking about this for days, cataloging what she could live with and what she couldn't. First, I work. I'm not going to be a kept woman living off your charity. I need employment, income that's mine. Agreed. I own several legitimate businesses that could use someone with your skills. Giuseppe taught you accounting, business management. You'd be an asset. Working for you isn't independence. Then work somewhere else. I'll provide references, ensure you're safe commuting, but the choice of employment is yours. He paused. Within reason. You're not working overnight shifts in dangerous neighborhoods. Lucia bristled at the control implied, then recognized the compromise. Fine. I choose the job. You approve the location for safety concerns. Second term? Sophia's education and activities. I make those decisions. You can fund them through the trust or whatever arrangement you prefer, but I decide where she goes to school, what extracurriculars she participates in, how she spends her time. Agreed, with one caveat. I maintain veto power over anything that puts her in unnecessary danger. Define unnecessary. In public schools in areas with active gang violence. Unsupervised activities. Situations where my enemies could use her against me. Alessandro's voice softened. I'm not trying to control her childhood, Lucia. I'm trying to ensure she has one. The distinction mattered. Lucia nodded. Agreed. Third term. We maintain separate living spaces within the penthouse. I'm not sharing a bedroom, and Sophia needs to understand that we're not a couple. She struggled for the word. Family, as you keep saying. But not romantic family. Something flickered across Alessandro's face. Disappointment, maybe, or understanding. Of course. You'll have complete privacy in your suite. I won't enter without invitation. Fourth. Lucia took a breath, knowing this one would be harder. If I decide to date someone, to build a relationship outside of this arrangement, you don't interfere. My personal life remains my own. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. When Alessandro finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. You're asking me to allow potential threats into proximity of you and Sophia. I'm asking you to respect my autonomy. Anyone I date would be vetted by me first. I'm not stupid, Alessandro. I know the risks now. But I also won't live the rest of my life alone because you're overprotective. Overprotective. He almost smiled. That's one word for it. What's another? Realistic about human nature and the wolves who'll see you as a way to get to me. Alessandro crossed his arms. But I'll agree to this term with modifications. Anyone you date gets a background check. Non-negotiable. If they have connections to my enemies or histories of violence, I reserve the right to object. Object, not prohibit. Object strongly. Ultimate choice remains yours, but I will make my concerns clear. It was more than Lucia expected, less than she wanted. But it was compromise, genuine negotiation rather than dictate. Agreed. Fifth and final term. This arrangement gets reviewed every 6 months. If either of us feels it's not working, we renegotiate or end it entirely. You want an exit strategy. I want to know I'm choosing to stay, not just accepting inevitability. Lucia met his eyes. Every 6 months we sit down and honestly assess whether this is working for both of us. If it's not, we figure out an alternative that still keeps Sophia and me safe. Alessandro considered this for a long moment. 6 months. Full transparency about concerns. Genuine negotiation about changes. And if we can't reach an agreement, then you help me relocate somewhere safe. Somewhere I can build a new life. You don't just withdraw protection and leave us vulnerable. I would never... He stopped himself, realizing she needed the explicit promise. I will never withdraw protection from you or Sophia, regardless of our personal arrangement. Even if you leave, even if you hate me, You remain under Romano family protection. Always. The word, always, hung between them with the weight of a vow. This wasn't temporary protection contingent on her cooperation. This was permanent, irrevocable, the kind of promise Alessandro Romano didn't make lightly. Then we have an agreement, Lucia said. Alessandro offered his hand. She shook it, feeling the now familiar warmth of his palm against hers, the controlled strength that could be gentle when it chose to be. I'll have my attorney draw up a formal document, he said. Everything we discussed, legally binding where applicable. You should have your own lawyer review it. I don't have a lawyer. Then I'll provide 3 names, independent attorneys not connected to me. You choose which one you want representing your interests. Alessandro released her hand slowly. This works only if you have real advocacy, Lucia. I don't want you agreeing to something you don't fully understand. The consideration, the genuine care for her informed consent, cracked something in Lucia's carefully maintained defenses. This wasn't the MAFIA boss who'd shot a man in her living room. This was the young man her father had invited to Sunday dinners, who'd needed someone to show him he could be more than a weapon. Thank you, she said softly. Don't thank me yet. 6 months living in my world might change your mind about everything. But as Lucia left his study and returned to the suite she now shared with Sofia, as she watched her daughter practice Italian with Mrs. Bianchi and laugh with genuine joy for the first time since the attack, she wondered if 6 months would change her mind, or simply confirm what she was already starting to suspect. That safety wasn't the only reason she'd agreed to stay. That somewhere in the past 2 weeks, she'd started seeing Alessandro Romano as more than just her father's friend, or her protector. That the most dangerous thing about accepting his protection wasn't the violence that came with it. It was the possibility of wanting to stay even after the threat was gone. 3 months after moving into Alessandro's penthouse, Lucia received a call that would test every negotiated term of their arrangement. Mrs. Conti? The voice on the phone was professional, unfamiliar. This is Dr. Esposito's office. Your daughter Sofia had an incident at school. Lucia's heart stopped. What kind of incident? Is she hurt? She's fine physically, but there was a situation with another child's parents. The school is requesting you come immediately. 20 minutes later, Lucia burst into the private academy where Sofia had enrolled. One of Alessandro's compromises, a school that was prestigious but also had security protocols that satisfied his concerns. She found Sofia sitting in the principal's office, her small face tear-stained but defiant, while a well-dressed couple argued loudly with the principal. Our son doesn't need to apologize, the woman was saying. If Sofia can't handle a few questions about her family. She's 5 years old, Lucia interrupted, her voice cold. What questions exactly was your son asking? The couple turned, looking her up and down with obvious disdain. The woman's expression soured further. Your daughter told our son that her family is protected by the MAFIA. She said, the woman's voice dripped with contempt, that anyone who's mean to her will have to answer to Alessandro Romano. Lucia's stomach dropped. She looked at Sofia, who had the grace to look ashamed, but also stubbornly proud. Mama, Tommy said we were poor, that we didn't belong here with the rich kids, that you couldn't even afford this school without... Sofia's voice dropped to a whisper, without charity. The truth hit like a physical blow. These children, or more likely their parents, had been discussing Lucia's financial situation, questioning how a single mother from Queens could afford an elite Manhattan academy. And Sofia, trying to defend her mother's dignity, had reached for the one defense she thought would work. Alessandro's name. Ms. Conti, the principal began, clearly uncomfortable. We need to discuss Sofia's understanding of appropriate conversation topics. The school has a strict policy about... About what? Lucia kept her voice level despite the fury building in her chest. About children defending themselves against bullying? About standing up when someone insults their family? Our son wasn't bullying, the father interjected. He was asking legitimate questions. And frankly, if your daughter is associated with organized crime— My daughter, Lucia said, each word precisely enunciated, is associated with a family friend who has been kind enough to help us during a difficult time. If your son was asking legitimate questions about our financial situation, perhaps you should examine what you're teaching him about class and privilege. The mother's face flushed. How dare you suggest— I suggest you examine why a 5-year-old felt the need to question another child's economic status. Lucia crossed the office, kneeling in front of Sophia. Baby, did Tommy say anything else? Sophia's eyes filled with tears. He said poor people don't belong at his school, that we should go back to our apartment in Queens where we belong. I see. Lucia stood, turning to face the principal. So my daughter defended herself against classist bullying by referencing a family friend, and somehow she's the one being reprimanded? Ms. Conti, invoking MAFIA connections isn't appropriate. Neither is tolerating economic discrimination among 5-year-olds. Lucia gathered her purse, extending her hand to Sophia. Come on, baby. We're leaving. Ms. Conti, if you remove Sophia from school grounds during the day then expel her. Send the paperwork to Alessandro Romano's legal team. I'm sure they'll be fascinated to learn about your school's tolerance for bullying as long as it comes from wealthy families. She left, Sophia's hand tight in hers, aware that she'd just made a scene that would have consequences. But she wouldn't, let her daughter be shamed for defending herself, even if that defense had involved invoking Alessandro's protection. They were halfway to the penthouse when her phone rang. Alessandro. I heard, he said without preamble. Angelo monitors all communications regarding Sophia's school. Are you both all right? We're fine. But Sophia's probably getting expelled for defending her family. Yes, I know. His voice was warm, approving. She's Giuseppe's granddaughter. She has his fire. She invoked your name, Alessandro. Told that boy her family was protected by you. And she was right. No hesitation in his voice. She is protected. You both are. If that makes other parents uncomfortable, that's their problem. Lucia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of choices made and consequences still unfolding. The school will issue a formal apology by end of day, and the child who bullied Sophia will be required to apologize directly. The family will also be reminded that tuition doesn't exempt their son from basic human decency. Alessandro paused. I'm on the board of directors. This will be handled. Of course he was on the board. Of course he had that kind of influence. Lucia had been naive to think enrolling Sophia in an elite school wouldn't eventually connect back to Alessandro's power and reach. I don't want you to protect your daughter from bullying. Too late. It's already done. His voice softened. Lucia, Sophia did nothing wrong. She stood up for herself and for you. That takes courage, especially at 5 years old. I'm proud of her. The words, simple, genuine, made Lucia's throat tight. She thinks we're family now. Really family. Not just an arrangement. We are family. Alessandro said it like it was self-evident. 3 months you've been here. 3 months Sophia has had stability, safety, joy. 3 months you've worked at the foundation. One of his legitimate businesses, managing grants for children's education programs, and proven yourself invaluable. This isn't temporary anymore, Lucia. It hasn't been for a while. He was right. Somewhere between negotiating terms and navigating daily life in the penthouse, between watching Alessandro teach Sophia Italian songs his grandfather had taught him and seeing how gently he could be with her daughter, Lucia had stopped counting days until she could leave. She'd started building a life here. I'm scared, she admitted. Of me. Of wanting this. Of depending on you. Of... She stopped, unable to articulate the most dangerous fear. Of caring about me. Alessandro finished quietly. I know. I feel it too. The admission hung between them through the phone line, weighted with everything they hadn't said in 3 months of careful distance and negotiated boundaries. We should talk about this, Lucia said. We should. But first I need to handle the school situation. Then tonight, after Sophia's asleep, we'll talk. Really talk. He paused. About what this has become. What we both want it to be. After they hung up, Lucia sat in the back of the SUV with Sophia curled against her side, processing the day's revelations. Her daughter had claimed Alessandro's protection publicly, had understood at 5 years old what Lucia had been trying to deny. That they weren't just staying here temporarily. They were becoming part of his world. Part of his family. That evening, after Sophia had been fed and bathed and tucked into bed with promises that school would be better tomorrow, after Mrs. Bianchi had retired for the night, and Angelo had finished his security sweep, Lucia found Alessandro in his study. He looked up from paperwork as she entered, and something in his expression made her heart race. The school apologized, he said. Formally and profusely. The family in question has been reminded of the school's zero-tolerance policy for bullying. Sophia can return tomorrow if she wants, or we can look at other options. She wants to go back. She said she's not letting Tommy win. Lucia closed the door behind her, leaning against it. She really is Giuseppe's granddaughter. She's yours too. You raised her to have that strength. Alessandro set aside his work, giving her his complete attention. You wanted to talk. About what this is. What we are. Lucia moved into the room, her heart pounding. 3 months ago, I negotiated terms for a temporary arrangement. Safety and protection in exchange for accepting your help. But that's not what this has become. No, it isn't. Sophia calls you Uncle Alessandro now. She asks for you when you're late coming home. She practices Italian so she can surprise you with new phrases. Lucia's voice wavered slightly. She's attached to you in ways that terrify me. Because if this ends, she loses another father figure. Alessandro stood, moving around his desk to face her. I know. I've thought about it too. And I have no intention of ending this. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to touch, but giving her space. Lucia, 3 months ago you walked into my life because your father made me promise to protect you. But somewhere in these months, it stopped being about Giuseppe's debt. What's it about now? You. The word was simple, absolute. It's about the way you defend your daughter with the same fierce loyalty Giuseppe showed me. About how you negotiated real terms instead of just accepting my dictates. About watching you build a life here while maintaining your independence. He moved closer. It's about coming home and finding you and Sophia in the kitchen with Mrs. Bianchi, laughing over burned cookies. About Sophia asking me to read her bedtime stories in Italian. About you trusting me with the most precious thing in your world. Lucia's breath caught. Alessandro. I'm falling in love with you. He said it quietly, certainly, like he'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed from it. With your strength, your principles, your refusal to be controlled even when accepting protection. With the life we're building together, the family we're becoming. And I know that complicates everything. That it wasn't part of our agreement. But I won't lie about it anymore. The confession hung between them, irrevocable and terrifying, and exactly what Lucia had been trying not to acknowledge in herself. This wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered. I know. I wasn't supposed to care about you. This was just protection, just honoring my father's connection to you. I know. But I do. The admission cost her everything. I care about you. More than I should. More than is safe. When you're late, I worry. When I see you with Sophia, something in my chest tightens. When you look at me like you're looking at me now, I forget every reason this is a terrible idea. Alessandro closed the remaining distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face with devastating gentleness. Then stop thinking of reasons. Just feel. He kissed her. Soft at first, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Lucia didn't pull away. She leaned into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with 3 months of denied want, and careful distance finally breaking free. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Alessandro rested his forehead against hers. This changes things. Everything, Lucia agreed. Our 6-month review is coming up. We're supposed to renegotiate terms. What if... Lucia's voice wavered, then strengthened. What if instead of renegotiating, we start over? Not as an arrangement, but as a real relationship, real family. Alessandro's hands were still gentle on her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. You, me, and Sophia, building something permanent. It's terrifying. It's worth it. He kissed her again, softer this time. Giuseppe would be happy, I think, that his debt led to this. He'd say he knew all along. Lucia smiled against his mouth. He was impossible like that. They stood there in Alessandro's study, wrapped in each other, while the city spread out below them through floor-to-ceiling windows. This wasn't the life Lucia had planned. Wasn't the safe, normal existence she'd tried to build after her father's death. But it was real. Honest. Built on 3 months of learning to trust, to compromise, to see past surfaces, to the complicated, honorable man beneath. 6 months later, when Sophia called Alessandro Papa for the first time, and he went very still before sweeping her up in his arms, Lucia understood that some debts could never be repaid. They could only transform into something better, into family, real, permanent, chosen family. The kind worth protecting with everything you had, the kind worth staying for, always.